When we have, I suppose, relatively homogeneous management, as in we're managing all these animals, under tightly controlled systems, like we do on research farms or on the demonstration farm, we have found that €1 CBV increases profitability by about €1.50, okay, for the beef farmer. All of our data is saying that CBV is a very good predictor of profitability. So it's a fundamental, I suppose, starting that you have to have higher CBV calves, gives you a much better chance of higher profitability.
Joining me today is Pádraig French from Teagasc, who has been closely involved in dairy beef research, including the Tipperary dairy beef demonstration farm. We'll discuss the key management practices that drive performance, the role of the commercial beef value, better known as CBV, what makes these systems financially successful, and what the latest research is telling us about the future of dairy calf to beef production. Pádraig, you're very welcome. I suppose dairy calf to beef is becoming an increasingly important part of both the dairy and the beef sectors, Pádraig. And from your perspective, where does the industry stand today? And I suppose, what gives you confidence about its future?
Yeah, so it has become a very significant part of the beef industry in that the number of the cattle being killed now is over 60% of the national prime cattle killed is coming from the dairy herd. And that is a swing around, say, over the last decade. It was 60% from the suckler herd, 40% from the dairy herd. Now it's swung the other way. So I suppose that's the first part of it. And from the dairy herd, we've seen a big uptake in sex semen. The dairy herd has stabilized at just over 1.6 million cows. And with the use of sex semen, there's more beef being used on the dairy herd. And this year, you're likely to see close enough to 1 million beef calves coming from the dairy herd. And most of those end up inside in the beef industry. Some of them are live exported, but they're the real driver of it. And I suppose we also saw in 2026 exceptional calf prices for those beef calves, which contributed significantly to the income of dairy farmers.
Yeah, and as you said, there's more of these animals around now, given the success of the sex semen story. Talk to me. There's more of them around, but it's important, I suppose, that we get these systems correct and ensure they're efficient and ensure they're profitable. From your research, what are some of the key management practices that have the biggest influence, we'll say, on lifetime performance and profitability of dairy beef animals?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing is you have to accept that the dairy beef supply chain is a fragmented chain. And it starts off with the dairy farmer, and they make some very important management decisions when they inseminate the dairy cow, when choosing the beef bull that they use. So there's a big genetic component. And, the genetics will drive the profitability over the animal's entire life. I suppose the second part of it then is when the animal is born, health is really important. And the dairy farmer has a very big influence there in the very early stage of the calf's life. Things like colostrum feeding and getting the animal off to a very healthy start is really important. The other, I suppose, key technologies that are going to influence the profitability of a dairy calf to beef system are around grazing management, we find really important. The grazing of the calf during the first grazing season can be challenging, and the management of that is a real challenge. And the second part of it is the dealing with the parasite load that is there through the grazing season and towards even in the second grazing season of those animals. The final part of it is, I suppose, the finishing the animals and getting them into spec, killing them, I suppose, at a relatively young age, because that improves the feed efficiency of those animals, but also, ensuring that the animals achieve target fatnesses, carcass weight, conformation, which is partly driven by genetics, but a lot driven by the management at that slaughter point. There's a significant proportion of animals are overfat when they're being killed, and those dairy beef animals can move from being underfat to being overfat much quicker than suckler animals.
You mentioned there the genetics piece and the importance of that. Maybe explain to our listeners a little bit about the commercial beef value, what it is, and why farmers should be paying attention to it.
The CBD, I think, if we take a step backwards first in the animal's life, when the dairy farmer is inseminating the dairy cow to a beef bull, they're using the DBI, which is the dairy beef index. and that includes the beef traits and the calving traits. Okay, so they'll be focused on calving difficulty, gestation length, calf mortality, but then also included in that DBI is the beef traits, the carcass traits, which is the growth rate, feed efficiency, carcass conformation, and fatness and age at slaughter. When the calf is born, obviously calving traits are not important anymore, and the calf then has a CBV. And when you inseminate the cow, the predicted CBV is going to be there on the expected calving profile. And that CBV is a measure of how much profit that animal is going to make in its life. It's taking out the traits of carcass growth rate is important, and carcass weight for age at slaughter, carcass conformation, carcass fat score. These are all genetically driven traits, and based on the animal's genetics, you're predicting how much profit that animal is going to make if it's carried through on a calf to beef system. And that's why the CBV is really important for the farmer who's buying that calf. They want higher CBV animals because we have very good data to say that those high CBV animals give us more profit.
That was my next question, actually,
Mm.
Pádraig. How confident can farmers be when selecting these higher CBV calves that they are going to deliver better performance and profitability?
Yeah, okay. So what we know is that these higher CBV calves have the genetics to deliver better profit. But obviously, management comes into it as well, and health and all of those traits, come into it afterwards, and how the farmer manages to exploit that potential. When we have, I suppose, relatively homogeneous management, as in we're managing all these animals, under tightly controlled systems, like we do on research farms or on the demonstration farm, we have found that €1 CBV increases profitability by about €1.50, okay, for the beef farmer. Okay. If you go across more diverse type of systems of rearing, that reduces because management comes in and has a bigger effect. But I suppose all of our data is saying that CBV is a very good predictor of profitability. So it's a fundamental, I suppose, starting that you have to have higher CBV calves, gives you a much better chance of higher profitability. But obviously, grassland management and health and all the other management traits start kicking in
Mm.
afterwards.
But with all else equal, a
Mhm.
€50 difference in CBV is a €75 gain at the end in terms of
Uh,
additional margin.
Additional profit for the beef farmer.
Yeah, that's important.
Mm.
Um, are you seeing dairy farmers, I suppose, change their breeding decisions in response to all of this? And would you like to see further progress in that space, Pádraig?
Yes, we are seeing significant change. So I suppose there's a couple of things that have happened. As I mentioned earlier, sex semen has, I suppose, become a significant part of the dairy industry in the last 3 to 4 years. And that has meant that AI has been used in on from the start of so traditionally, dairy farmers would have AI to conventional semen and then moved on to beef semen. Now they're selecting their cows for the dairy semen, and the rest of the cows are getting beef semen. So beef semen is going into the dairy herd at the very start of the breeding season, and that is primarily AI. And they're selecting bulls that have potentially much higher DBI and CBVs, producing higher CBV calves. So yeah, we're seeing that as, I suppose, the first thing. The second thing we're seeing on a lot of dairy farms now is the introduction of collars. It's close enough that a third of the dairy cows of the country are wearing collars now, which is being used for heat detection, and therefore they're able to continue to use AI for longer into the breeding season. I suppose one of the advantages of collars makes heat detection a lot easier, and farmers are more comfortable to continue to use AI for the entire breeding season, even, and take out the requirement for stock bulls. And that is having the effect of more better bulls being used, more selection. Like when you're selecting AI, you can match the bull to the cow much better than obviously with stock bulls, and therefore you can use higher DBI bulls and have produce higher CBV calves. So we are seeing those two trends happening. I suppose we would like to get significantly more, particularly, I suppose, on the bull side. Like there is more potential there to increase genetic gain of the bulls that are being used to generate these beef cross calves. And if we look around the world, there's significant investment in breeding programs for producing beef on dairy. And there's significant potential with new technologies to increase the rate of genetic gain of beef bulls being used on the dairy herd. And we think that's where the potential will be in the future. And we are also likely to see continued uptake of sex semen and continued uptake of the use of collars, which is going to drive more AI into the more beef AI into the dairy herd.
Mm. Profitability, and it's always up for debate around different beef systems, but profitability of the dairy beef systems, ultimately that's what's going to determine the success of any system, Pádraig. What are the biggest drivers of, we'll say, financial performance in dairy beef enterprises?
Yeah. So I suppose the first thing to recognize about a dairy beef enterprise in comparison to say a suckler beef program is that you have a much higher input and output. So typically in an intensive suckler beef system, you're selling 400 to 500 kilos of beef per hectare. In a dairy calf to beef system, you're up at over 1,000 kilos of beef per hectare. Okay,
Mm.
so you're much more sensitive then to prices. Okay, so there's potential for much higher margin in a dairy calf to beef system, but it needs more technical input, and
Mm.
there's more management in it, but there's more of a response as well from better management. But going back to, I suppose, the key drivers of it, and I suppose the technologies that we've been focused on, it's it's the genetics is a big one. After that is grazing management. Like, you can run an intensive calf to beef system and drive most of the gain from feeding concentrates or grain to the animals, but there's very low margin in it. In a calf to beef system, you're generally looking at 12, 13 kilos of feed per kilo of carcass gain. If that's coming from concentrates, there's very little margin left for the beef farmer. If that's coming from grass or from grass silage, there's potentially a significant margin there. So the more grass eaten, or the higher I suppose, the tons of grass grown and utilized on a calf to beef enterprise, the more profit there is on in the system. And that's where the real margin is how much beef can you produce from grass, and what is the you know the potential to, I suppose, minimize the amount of the gain that's coming from concentrates.
Mm. And you mentioned there's a lot of work happening there on the genetic side. Is
Mhm.
that grass and grazing and grass utilized the real one where you're seeing big differences there? We'll say when you
Mhm.
look at commercial farms, maybe running higher margins than others.
Yeah, if you can account for the amount of grass that's being utilized on a calf to beef farm, you can pretty much predict profitability. Because there is a big margin in turning grain into beef, or sorry, in turning grass into beef, and there's a very poor margin in turning grain into beef in our systems. So therefore, if you can predict how much grass is being utilized on a farm, you can predict profitability. But that's coming down to, firstly, you have to grow the grass, so you have to have soil fertility and grazing management and grazing infrastructure right. And then you have to have the right stock that can perform on that grass. So you need healthy animals that will consume lots of grass and grow fast on a grass diet. And you also need, in a calf to beef system, really critical that you have high quality silage. In a dairy system, where you're spring calving, or in a suckler system, poor quality winter feed, you can put it off the cows that are over conditioned. There's no problem. There is no place for poor quality silage in a calf to beef system.
Mm. You mentioned there in terms of exposure, given inputs are higher and your outputs are higher from a dairy beef system. Given current beef prices and production costs, what does a profitable dairy beef system look like today? Where are the margins at, Pádraig?
Okay, so I suppose we can, refer particularly to the Tipperary demonstration farm, which has been running for 4 or 5 years now. And like 2025 was an extraordinary year from a profitability perspective.
Mm.
And the the farm in 2025, after paying full labor costs and without any single farm payment, gave a margin about 1,600 euros per hectare. Okay. And that is exceptional, but like, it benefit from relatively a high beef price and relatively low calf prices. Okay. Relative to where they are this year. And I suppose that has changed fairly significantly And the in 2026, so we've seen a drop in beef price, and we've seen a significant increase in calf price in 2026, and that margin will drop down to somewhere around the €500 per hectare is what we're predicting at the moment.
Is that where you think year on year that is going to maybe there'll always be fluctuations, Pádraig, but that should be fairly consistent across, we'll say, a 5 or 6 year period. That's the margin that's achievable at good levels of efficiency.
Yeah, well, I suppose we're always hoping to drive on efficiency,
Mm.
and we're continuously focusing on, I suppose, taking out all of the weaker points in the system and trying to improve on those and trying to benefit from better genetics and trying to get that match right between stocking rate and the amount of pasture you're producing. So, like the market is pretty outside of our control. We have to pay for calves what the market is determining calf price, and we have to take what beef price the market is giving at the time. So they're outside of our control. We can just focus on the technologies. The margin will go up and down. Then but if you focus on the technologies, and if you can keep up the proportion of grass in the diet, you will keep down your cost of production.
Mm.
Like we had a break even price back a year or two ago of about €5.70 per kilo. And that's increased now to about 6.40 per kilo, driven by primarily the increased calf price. Now we know that when beef price comes down, you can predict the calf price will follow it back down as well, and our cost of production will come down. But it is that, I suppose, focus on what it costs you to produce a kilo of beef is what really the farmer um, needs to focus on, rather than trying to play the market as where beef price is going to go and where calf prices are going to go.
You mentioned there, and you've alluded to it, the Tipperary dairy beef demonstration farm. That's obviously an important source of practical advice for farmers. Maybe just outline the objectives of that project and explain that project to our listeners if they haven't heard of it before.
So the Tipperary Dairy Beef Farm was a project we set up back in 2022. And the real focus of it was, how do we integrate the dairy industry with the beef industry? How can they work together to have the beef calves on the dairy herd move seamlessly into the beef system? So we set it up as a standalone business. The reason is that we could, have an audited set of accounts that's totally transparent of, this is what it cost us to set it up. This is what it costs us to operate. These are the inputs and outputs, and they're there for everyone to see. So we actually brought in a beef processing and a dairy processing partners with us to set up this farm. So Dawn Meats are the beef processor that have been with us and have been a partner in this. And the other partner is Shannock Estates, which is part of the West Cork Co-ops. And together, I suppose they set up the farm, and we have a management services. We in Teagasc have a management services agreement with the farm. The calves come from 9 dairy herds in West Cork, and they go on to the beef farm at 2 to 3 weeks of age. The calves in are all carried through to beef as steers and heifers. So there's one and a half, I suppose, full-time labour units on the farm, and they provide all the labour to manage these calves. The farm originally was about 110 hectares, so it was a big farm. And in 2025, we expanded it by another 25 hectares because that piece of land came up for lease inside the middle of the farm. So we're up now at about 138 hectares, of which we're able to utilize about 127 hectares. We have some of it is a bit away from the main block. There's 8 hectares out there that's under cereals. So we're farming under pasture about 120 hectares. We're stocking heavy at about 3.5 calves per hectare. That's what we buy onto the farm as calves. That's about 440 calves that came in this year. And they'll be all reared through to beef at, a carcass weight that is within factory spec. So they're coming in from 18 to 24 months of age, they're being slaughtered, but typically about a 20-month slaughter age. And all the animals carried through to slaughter, and it's very focused on, forage, keeping grass and grass silage are the key drivers of animal performance. We have a big focus on the genetics. So a big part of it is the integration of the dairy farm with the beef farm. So these 9 farms that we have contracted to supply us with calves, we sit down at the start of the year and decide what bulls they'll use next year. Okay, we agree with them kind of the traits that they want around calving difficulty and gestation length, and then we look at trying to find out suitable sires that will give us high growth rate and confirmation that we have a health protocol for moving the calves, and that has made it, I suppose, much easier for the farm manager to plan the movement of calves onto the farm and to manage them from a health perspective. And I said then all the calves are carried through to beef, and it's the focus is on trying to maximize performance from pasture, trying to manage health, trying to manage parasites, and trying to, I suppose, cope with the nutrient management to such that we can grow a lot of grass, but still try and minimize the amount of nitrogen that's going into the system. And ultimately to maximize profitability. How can we maximize profit from that system with a big focus on the return on labor? Like labor is the biggest input on a beef farm. The farmer's own labor, the amount of time that they're spending on the farm. And a lot of farmers, particularly in dairy beef systems, are part-time. So their labor is scarce. They've worked and they're off the farm a lot, and they need to get a good return on the labor. And that's a big focus of what we'll have on the open days, actually. The return you can get from a dairy beef system in terms of per hour worked. And that's about, being labor efficient, but also having a profitable system.
Is there anything that surprised you, or any kind of lessons, Pádraig will say, that you have seen over the last number of years? You said it was set up in 2022, so you're a number of years running now. Anything maybe
Yeah.
that jumps out at you?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that we had anticipated like bringing in 400 calves onto a farm. We could say that could be very, very challenging from a health perspective. So these are coming from many different farms. But by having the protocol in place, we have been, I suppose, very surprised and pleasantly surprised by having exceptionally healthy animals. And this is down to the dairy farmers, really. They're very good at doing colostrum management, and they know where their calves are going, and they're vaccinating the calves on the dairy farm before they move to the beef farm. And that has been a really, a big help. With calf mortality has been less than 1%. When you're bringing a lot of calves in over a short period of time, and managing it well, it has worked really well. So that has been, I suppose, surprisingly, I suppose, good for us.
That's a big one, Pádraig, in the fact
Yeah,
that everybody knows that the workload comes where there's an animal health breakdown and there were sick
yeah,
calves, and like that's really where the pressures come in any of these systems.
yeah. So one of the big challenges we got hit within was we got a summer scour breakdown in the summer of 2025.
Mm.
And I suppose there's a lot of theories out there around summer scour and what's causing it and what can we do about it. Um, And I suppose we have put a plan in place to manage that. Now, in fairness, we're very fortunate in Tipperary. We have a really good farm manager there in Jack Spillane, and he, I suppose, put in a massive effort there through that summer score breakdown last summer. We learned an awful lot from it, and I suppose the management changes that we've made for this year, which seem up till now to be working reasonably well. We're getting better calf performance this year, and we believe we're better set up for coping with that rumen development period from post weaning till
Mm.
complete adoption to a grass diet. That
Just
that's the
just
thing we put a massive focus on.
You mentioned, we'll come to the open day in a minute, and I not to steal all the thunder, but I'm sure there's people actually listening to this podcast that maybe you're dealing with a summer scour issue as we speak. Just quickly, what's those main protocols or main things that you have changed to try and reduce the incidence of that?
So I suppose there's two parts to it really. The first is a rumen development. So a focus on rumen development of the animals before they're transitioned to a grass only system. And that, I suppose, we're focusing on this year on the period immediately post weaning. That if we can focus and get more intake, which is in the form of grain, into the calves during that immediate period post weaning, that we can get high animal performance and good rumen development. The second part of it then is monitoring. So typically we were weighing cattle once monthly. And when we retrospectively looked at it, we found that the calves that got summer scour had been underperforming in the month prior to it, or the weights prior to the actual becoming clinically ill.
Before they
And
showed actually signs, Pádraig.
before they showed any clinical signs, they were underperforming when we retrospectively went back and looked at it. And I suppose now what we've changed this year is we're monitoring more frequently. So we're weighing more often and pulling out those low performers quickly, and ensuring that, I suppose, firstly, that they're monitored closely, but secondly, that we focus on, rumen development with those animals as well.
Are you doing anything different then at grass at that initial stage when you go to grass, or?
Yeah, well, we're feeding, I suppose, high concentrate levels for a very short period post turnout.
Okay.
And that is really that we know from all of our research on calf rearing, we've always found that we get very low performance in calves in the immediate period post weaning when they're turned out. They just can't eat enough grass. And we are pushing them with higher levels of concentrates. So traditionally, we would have fed 1 to 2 kilos of concentrates. But the problem with that level of concentrates was we were causing big substitution of grass and not getting high performance, or not getting much of a response to that concentrates at all. So I suppose we have switched it slightly now that we're going with very high levels of concentrates. We're getting 3.5 kilos, up to 4 kilos of concentrates into them for that immediate period post weaning and post turnout. And that's getting us very high growth rates for a few weeks. And then we step more down off concentrates onto the forage diet. And what we're seeing is better rumen development, higher growth rate through that period, and overall, I suppose, higher performance.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that we touch on it, because it is something that is very frustrating at farm level, let it be with dairy beef calves or even replacement heifer calves. You have a great batch of calves, Pádraig, and all of a sudden you get a bout of this and it hits them hard. So you mentioned there, sorry, Pádraig, yeah.
No, I was going to say, I think it's important for someone that's dealing with a summer scour issue, like, it's to get the calves in, get them rehydrated. They need electrolytes. In a lot of cases, the calves stop eating. So you have to treat them fast. Like, in fairness to Jack, he put in a massive effort and he got all the calves through last year with the summer scour. But it took a lot of minding. And the sooner you get the calves in and back eating and rehydrated, the less damage is done and the quicker they'll come out of it.
Yeah. You mentioned the open day. So there's an open day on the Tipperary Dairy Beef Demo Farm. Just highlight in terms of when that is and what farmers maybe can expect on the day.
Okay, so the open day is on the 22nd, next Wednesday. And the farm, I suppose, firstly, for anyone that's travelling to it, is on the road from Cashel to Feathered. So if you're coming along the M8, you'll get off at, I think it's the number 8 exit on the motorway, and you'll head for that's the second Cashel exit. Whether you're coming from the south or the north, it'll be the second Cashel exit, and you'll head for Feathered. And the farm will be signposted along that road. Okay. The event kicks off at 11 o'clock in the morning. And the focus will be on all of the technologies that drive profitability. We look at what profit we achieved in 25, what we're expecting in 26, and what's going to drive that. And then we'll get into those technologies around genetics, grassland management, and health. I suppose are the big ones. There's also going to be a fairly significant focus on water quality, because it's important, I suppose, for both dairy farmers and beef farmers to minimise nitrogen loss to groundwater.
Very good. And will there be proceedings available too for online? I'm sure there will.
There will, yeah. So there's stuff already up, I think, on the Teagasc website. We'll have information there for the farmers on the day, and we'll make all of the boards available online. We'll have a couple of clinics for farmers. There'll be one with ICBF focusing on the CBV, and there's also going to be one focusing for farmers dealing with drought at the moment. And the farm in Ballyvadin is dealing with a very significant drought at the moment. But there'll be a clinic that's being run by the Dairy Specialist Service that will focus on how to deal with drought at the moment.
Look, Pádraig, thanks for your time. Look, that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, folks. My thanks to Pádraig French for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.